Welcome to Talking Out Cloud, the podcast where we discuss the latest developments in IT and cloud. And in today's episode, all things as a service, platform as a service, IaaS, SaaS. What do we do? Why do we do it? What's the benefit? Let's talk. Morning.
Hello, Wesley.
So, how are you?
Fine. Excited to do this podcast.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm good. Also looking forward to this one because I think it's, we write designs as consultants and architects. And I think this is one of the main questions, like what do we do? Why do we do it? And with what intent?
Definitely. Also, for not only for us, but also for the customer.
Yeah. And then there's some things that, we do use, we don't use. Maybe we're a consumer as well as Intercept.
Yeah.
So let's break it down.
Yeah.
And let's start with the lowest level of things.
Yeah.
Infrastructure as a service.
Yeah.
IaaS.
Yes.
You could argue that everything that comes after this conversation is built on IaaS.
Yes, definitely. I think IaaS is like what we used to do in with regular data centers. Mm-hmm. We have our hardware, we maintain it itself, we install it itself. Maybe we build it ourselves. But yeah, it's the virtual machine. I think with all the disks and that's IaaS.
VMs, VNets,
yeah,
everything. And I think in terms of responsibility, you have absolute most control possible, right? You can do everything. You can configure the networking, configure the VM, the operating system. You have to do the patching.
Yes, important one.
Yeah, so it's the
availability, maybe.
Availability, yeah.
Availability.
You have the most control, but also the most responsibility.
Yeah.
But it is like we did on-prem.
Yeah.
But IaaS on Azure comes with additional benefits, right? We can still patch management. Yes, you are responsible, but you can automate it because there's patch management, right?
Definitely.
And backups, the same thing, I guess.
Backups, the same thing. Like I said, disaster recovery maybe use that. So you have definitely plus points when you use IaaS in Azure.
And when would you use IaaS? Is that like from a lift and shift scenario?
Lift and shift. Yeah, I think lift and shift. We did a lot lift and shift scenarios from customers that wanted to use the public cloud, but not are there yet for modernization, to containerize different workloads. So that is an ideal situation to move your stuff into the cloud.
All right, yeah, and then we did that with what was that called? It still exists. The thing that analyzes stuff.
Oh, Azure Migrate.
Azure Migrate.
You can do it two ways. So Azure Migrate is an appliance you install on the environment of the customer you want to do the lift and shift. It analyze the workload. It will give you the SKUs you need to, or you can choose when you want to run the load in the Azure cloud. But you can also use ASR, Azure System of Disaster Recovery, to recover your services in the Azure cloud.
It's thinking out loud here. The infrastructure as a service, I think it brought us as businesses a lot. It was the first thing in the cloud, right?
It's the first thing, yeah.
You had what was it? I think you had Azure SQL, storage accounts, and VMs.
Yeah.
And then we still had classic VMs as well. It was Azure Service Manager.
Something like that.
It was ASM. And then we moved to Azure Resource Manager. And we as Intercept, we actually build a whole business out. So little sidetrack. we started doing Azure, and then we did Azure Service Management. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, Microsoft said, we are now going to do Azure Resource Manager. So that's the Azure we have now with the resource providers, the ARM APIs, etc. There was no migration scenario. So if you had backup configured, you had to configure it again in ARM. If you had a VM, you could not click and move it to ARM.
Oh.
You had to export, so the disk for ASM, for Azure Service Manager, the disk was still stored on storage accounts. So for every VM, you need a storage account, and then you had the VHD on the storage account. So what we then did was we exported the VM, we generated a new ARM template, and then we would use a script with AZ copy. to move the disk from one storage account to a new storage account in the ARM model. And then we would reprovision the VM with the same disk as Azure Resource Manager. And we did so there's a whole process, and then we did some automation. And at some point, we thought we can turn this into a proposition. And I could say we had significant growth with that proposition. We would ask a fixed price for a VM, and then we migrated it to ARM.
Oh man!
And at some point we were imagine back then we were like 10 people, small MSP in the Netherlands. We would migrate VMs from ASM to ARM for vineyards in California, and that was so cool. That was infrastructure as a service. I mean, you can't do that with platform as a service. You have to reprovision. Definitely. But VMs, VNets, disks. I agree with you. It's the lift and shift, move and improve. It is not necessarily for some scenarios, but not necessarily where you want to end up. There's things after that. With the exception, I have to say, I mean, you still need VMs. Let's say you do batch processing, you do Azure Batch, or you do. But then it's not. There's a difference between infrastructure as a service and VMs, and infrastructure as a service VMs managed by something. So managed by AKS or managed by Azure Machine Learning. So that's still compute. But then you don't have the responsibility of managing it. That's it.
That's the difference.
But is it then still infrastructure as a service?
Well, it's a really good point, because if you talk about that one, you have also different resources that looks like PaaS solutions, but it is just compute. It is
Azure Kubernetes Service.
Yeah.
So is that infrastructure as a service, or is that platform as a service?
That's a good question. Virtual network gateway, something like that. It's just Azure Firewall. Yeah.
Is something as a service, is it determined by the level of responsibility and control, or by the technical stack? We're not going to answer that this podcast, but
there will be a long discussion.
Because we do see that the higher we move up in the stack, the less responsibility for the customer. There's always a shared responsibility model, right? So I do something, Microsoft does something. Security is a good example.
Always.
I think in general, security, if you look at ISO 27001, if you want to be certified in that and you want that as a company, there's like a whole chapter on physical security, which your office needs to be secured and needs to have a lock and access needs to be reviewed. But your data center, Microsoft takes care of that. Those audit reports are publicly available. So whichever model you choose, there's a shared responsibility component.
Always and also how you configure the resource you will get from Microsoft. So that's the responsibility I guess you mean, because if I get the tools but I don't build it in a secure way, I'm responsible for that one.
Oh, definitely.
So
it's IaaS, most control, most responsibility, most level of freedom. You can do whatever you want. And then we have the next one, platform as a service. What's that? It's
something that the resource, this platform as a service, is like we said already. I think that's the level of resources running on Azure that you don't. You have control about it, but not on a patch level, not on an. You have control of the security level, but not on the default one, I guess. The backup, maybe the regional availability. So it's basically what Microsoft is maintaining for you.
All right. So would you say that, let's say I have a virtual machine and it runs IaaS.
Yes.
And if I want that to be high available, I need 2 virtual machines.
Yes. Maybe a load balancer.
A load balancer, IaaS configured, all of that. And if I do platform as a service, I basically get IaaS as a platform available to me with availability features.
Maybe like a web app, something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's a good example.
So then I don't have to manage it, but there's also, you can manage some parts, right? With the Kudu thing, it's all built on Kudu.
Yeah, you can. You have some breathing room to control and maintain and configure your application. But for the main availability, you get some points from Microsoft.
Yeah, so you get the horizontal and vertical scaling, and you can add instances without downtime, but you cannot scale up because it will restart. The downside is you don't have all the control, right?
No.
So there's Let's say let's say you're playing in the sandbox.
Yeah.
As long as you remain within the sandbox, you can do everything you want.
Yes.
But do not step out.
No.
Because that's a problem.
You need to stay within the lines with Microsoft, else it's not supported, or you will have some problems with running your app, I guess.
I find it. In the beginning, I found it very hard to write a business case for using platform as a service.
Yeah.
Because it's more expensive.
Yeah.
But then, if so, this was the example I had with customers in the past when they wanted to move to Azure from a data center.
Yeah.
All right, so it's IaaS. Oh, we can run it in web apps. We can test that.
Yeah.
Yes, but if I have one VM with IaaS, it's cheaper than running it in a web app, and that is absolutely true. Because you have the app service plan and you run one web app, it is more expensive. And then the question is why? Well, is that VM on-prem? Is that now high available with a load balancer, patch management automated, everything scaling automated? Is that in place? And then they will go, nope.
Definitely.
But then you're comparing apples to pears, right?
It's apples with pears because
or apples and oranges in English. We say apples and pears in Dutch, but it's apples and oranges.
When you want to use the PaaS solution, maybe the consumption is higher, but you don't have the manship or the workforce behind it because because that will not cost you any time for that, I guess. So not only for a cost perspective, but also for maybe
maintainability.
Yeah, maintainability. Let's say you have an Azure firewall or a native Azure firewall as a PaaS solution, and you compare it with a FortiGate, a network virtual appliance. You will have more. You need to do more maintenance on a FortiGate than on an Azure firewall.
And also from a pricing perspective, and I think FortiGates and stuff are good solutions.
Yeah, definitely.
You purchase. You buy you pay for the compute, but then 99% of the time you also have to pay a license somewhere, which is not done through Azure, but indirectly with FortiGate. So those are costs. If you want to make the right comparison, add those costs as well, add everything, then see what features you have,
and then compare it.
Yeah. And then platform as a service will be cheaper
if you break it down step by step. Yeah, I guess so.
And it's also got way more features. Like let's Azure SQL.
Yeah,
as an example. Yes, one database on Azure SQL might be a bit more expensive, but that's stock elastic pools. You can never do that on-prem.
No.
The concept of elastic pools is I purchase or I pay for capacity.
Yeah.
And I can have like 20 databases running in that pool.
Yeah.
And as long as they don't all peak at the same time,
it's fine. Yeah.
And for most applications, not all customers are clicking things at the same time. You'll be fine.
You'll be fine, definitely.
So that's very efficient.
It's efficient, and like you said, you will not do it on your on-premise environment. The same thing an elastic pool can do. So
yeah. And you get automated backups and stuff, right? I think it's like by default you get 31 days for Azure SQL or 30 days.
The backup and the disaster recovery is maybe in place. The high availability is there. Yeah.
All right, and then we have serverless.
Yeah, and that's
the next level.
That's the next level. And also maybe something that started before the whole shift to the cloud, because before that we used SharePoint.
Well, that's software service, right?
SaaS, yeah.
But serverless.
Oh, serverless. Sorry.
So Azure Functions, Logic Apps, Event Grid, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think we. So before we move on to SaaS, I think everything we PaaS, IaaS, serverless, we use that to build SaaS products.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
This is what I see customers do. But serverless, is serverless, I may not always have the most popular opinion, but so serverless, like an Azure Function, is you have the runtime there for you and you just push your code.
Yeah.
But you have to follow the construct of that runtime. You have to follow what so you have to write code specific to Azure Functions. So that's like with platform as a service, you write for a platform. So you write a website and you either use Windows or Linux. App service plans can do that. With Azure Functions, you write with an SDK for Azure Functions.
Yes.
That's absolute vendor lock-in.
Yeah.
However, it's insanely cheap.
Yeah.
You pay for, I think someone once called it micro billing. So you,
Is that so?
Yeah, you pay for the seconds that it runs, but then you also pay for the seconds you use X amount of memory, and then you get the first 1 million executions for free.
Yeah.
So it's a very small things that you pay for. So if it executes all day, every day, it's going to be expensive.
Yeah.
But if not, it's turned off and it only runs when it's
needed.
But it's still an app service plan in the back end, by the way.
Definitely.
You see it when people build like more event-driven. So let's say something happens in the database and that triggers an Azure function that then does something and then triggers a logic app and then sends the result to an event grid. And because it's an event grid, it will trigger another thing like a chain reaction of event-driven stuff, which means that you only pay
for the stuff.
For when the event occurs. Yeah. But I also read somewhere that things like using Azure Functions is a great way to build technical depth. Because you just write the logic, but you never write everything around it because you get that.
Yeah, you will get it using that event-based triggering, right?
Yeah, so it's what we see in microservices, event-driven architectures. It's very cheap. Sometimes people say, so it's logical to go from IaaS to PaaS to serverless. I think that just depends on what you want.
It's your workload, I guess.
Yeah. Because I'd also say the more Azure does for you, the less control you have, period.
Yes.
Which Definitely. Is, I think, boardroom decision. How much vendor login do you want?
How flexible you want to be.
Yeah,
definitely.
But then we have companies that go, I have a SaaS first policy. What is SaaS? What is software as a service?
Software as a service, like I said before, it is like when we use SharePoint.
Yeah.
Nowadays using Microsoft 365 maybe in the browser. It's just software running in your browser, I guess. With maintaining, updating, availability, where the responsible lies only with Microsoft. You have no control whatsoever.
I just pay for it.
You pay for it.
Usually in a subscription model.
Yeah.
So I pay for it every month.
Yeah.
And then if I need additional features, I go from from the standard subscription to the premium one?
Yeah, from the E3 to the E5, and you will have maybe an extra Visio, something like that. Yeah.
So is software as a service defined by tech or by experience? How you experience it?
Oh, that's a good question. I think how you experience it. I think the interface.
I think that's also something that matured over time.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm a software company.
Yeah.
And I have a client server application and I modernize that or I repackage it so that the customer can access it through the browser as they just go to Wesley's fantastic SaaS solution .intercept.cloud and they get the portal, they log in, they can do everything.
Yeah.
That's a SaaS experience. And then I add the subscription model. So they pay per month, pay for the subscription. I think that for me, that's software as a service.
Yeah.
Anything else behind that is either PaaS, IaaS, serverless, or containerization, something. Because that's what you see. Those concepts, they built SaaS.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think a long time ago, there was still some confusion. They would say, so software as a service, that's also multi-tenancy in the backend. That's not necessarily true.
No, I also don't think so. Yeah, maybe because you've only the user, you don't see how it's being run on the background, maybe. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it doesn't really say it is so.
I would even say it. So multi-tenancy for me is using the same backend or shared front ends, etc. Multi-tenancy for me is not everything is running in the same database.
No.
If I mean, from a security perspective, what I see a lot in new designs, which I'm an absolute fan of, is we have some processing that happens in the backend. We have a front end, a website, which is the shared component. Every customer uses the same app service to log in. Mm-hmm. But then the processing or the backend storage is per customer, database per customer, storage account per customer. Yeah. Absolute isolation.
Yeah.
it's still a SaaS experience. It's still SaaS. You still have a subscription model.
Exactly,
but you do the isolation.
Yeah.
And why do we do that? It's risk spreading and also customer requirement, I'd say. But
there's also maybe from a security isolation point of view. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
All right. So let's say I start with IaaS.
Yeah.
Then I do app modernization.
Yeah.
So do I then go from IaaS to PaaS to SaaS, or do I go from IaaS to containers to PaaS? Do I go from IaaS directly to serverless? Is there like a fixed path, or can I design whatever I want?
No, you can always design whatever you want. But I think the best thing to do is to look at your workloads. You can also do some scans. We already talked about Azure Migrate, I guess. Mm-hmm. But you also some tools when you scan your ES or your applications to check if some PaaS solutions like a web app or something like that is available or suited for your workload. So I think the next step will be PaaS, but also SaaS can. It all depends on your work. I think on your business.
And that's, I think, in IT it all depends, and I think it does, because let's say I'm a bank.
Yeah.
I probably want to stick to IaaS, and maybe even a combination, or maybe even a hybrid scenario. I've got some stuff in my own data center. I've got some IaaS in Azure. PaaS, not enough control. I need control. I need compliance and governance. That's a bank.
For a compliance standard, this is a really good point that you will make. That's a really good point. You have different dependencies. The sector where you work in, the product you want to sell or want to maintain. Mm-hmm. But it all comes down to check and listen and talk with your customer to see, hey, what is your purpose? What do you want? Where's your red dot on the line?
And that's the thing, because the customer always wants the most control.
Yeah.
Spend as few money as possible. So infrastructure as a service is expensive. Yeah. But anything PaaS is too much control by Microsoft and less control by me. Mm-hmm. And then and I mean, technically, this should fall under IaaS or PaaS. I think it's a different subject. Containers. Yeah. Let's say I'm that bank and I want compliance, infrastructure. I want an operating system I can manage. Yeah. A container is just that. It's just smaller. Yeah. So I think containers give the benefits. They provide the benefits of platform as a service and serverless, but they give the control and flexibility of infrastructure as a service.
You will have exactly the same compute resource you can manage exactly with containerization, right? So
I think that's what makes it popular. Yeah, you get the best of both worlds.
It's maybe an evolution of a virtual machine then.
Well, technically, that's what containers are, right? Yeah. It's virtualization. Yeah, it's still networking, still operating system, still patching.
Yeah. So maybe that's maybe a good conclusion then. Yeah.
Containers are how we do IaaS with a DevOps and automation mindset. Yeah. I would say that, yeah. Yeah. All right. And then if I pick one, do I stick to one, or is it like an ever-evolving thing? Should I remain on platform as a service? Do I rethink? Can I go from PaaS back to IaaS? I mean,
I think the last one is hard, maybe from PaaS to IaaS. It's doable, but I don't think you want that. But it is doable. I think be flexible. So like I said, check what business you want to migrate or modernize. But you can also use combinations of IaaS and PaaS. I think
that's the key.
Yeah. And also, when starting with IaaS, and you're talking about containerization or modernization, you can also it's a long time. It's maybe a long-term migration path if you want to use a PaaS solution in the end. So maybe you need to be flexible in the beginning.
And so it's fit for purpose.
Fit for purpose, yeah.
Maybe and there's also some requirements, right? So I can, if I have, let's say, an MS SQL database. Yeah. I want to move that to Azure SQL. Yeah. I cannot do cross-database queries. Stored procedures are a thing. No. I cannot run executables in my database. So there's some limitations. Yeah. Those limitations are often driven by best practices. I mean, if there's a limitation, let's say you run an MS SQL server and you cannot move to Azure SQL because of limitations,
Yeah.
The question is, are you really following the best practices, and is it a good idea to use? So that's something to reconsider. But sometimes you can't, so you remain with a VM in Azure with a database on it, and then maybe you can do hybrid benefit, and you can do but then maybe you can move to Azure SQL.
Yeah.
But then your front-end application cannot. So you can have IaaS and PaaS. It's fit for purpose, right?
Exactly, it's fit for purpose. That's also a good point you make, because we want to modernize everything, but if your front end or some dependencies are not ready yet, you need to take care of that. Think of that and think of other solutions, and then a combination is perfect.
A good decision making tree or way. So let's say you come from on-prem and you go to Azure.
Yeah.
So let's not assume you're in Azure. Let's forget about app modernization in Azure. Just you want to go to the public cloud for whatever reason. And then you should be able to answer that reason. The reason is not, I want to go to the public cloud. There needs to be a business case, something.
No, exactly.
But so in a couple of episodes ago, we talked about the well-architected framework, but there's something else as well, which is the cloud adoption framework, clearly states for every workload you have. So let's say a workload can be remote desktop services. A workload can be a database server, can be an application server. For every workload, you do an analysis and an assessment on how that would run on Azure.
Yeah.
And then there's decisions, right? Do I lift and shift or move and improve? Or do I refactor some of the code so that I can use an app service?
Yep.
Or do I, there was a whole, you have rehost, refactor, re-architect, rebuild. Like you've got different steps, like 4 or 5 R's. You have to do that for each and every workload.
Yeah.
It's not that you decide, I'm going to do platform as a service, so everything needs to be platform as a service. That's not the architectural decision here.
No, it cannot. Good point, because it also means that if the CAF, the Cloud Adoption Framework, says okay, refactor that, and it will take maybe a year or 2 years before that process can happen, then that's just it. It cannot be a reason to say, hey, I want to go to Azure Cloud, I want to use PaaS. So if the conclusion is refactor your code, do that first, because it will make your product maybe more mature, I guess.
Yeah, and with that, you also always determine what is the financial trade-off. What is it? If I go to the cloud, also, if I refactor, what is it going to cost me? Yeah. What will it bring me in the future? What is my return on investment? And that's a decision to make.
You will need to do some trade-offs, I guess.
Yeah. Personally, I always like the most level of control.
Always, not always, but also with troubleshooting.
But then I don't want to manage the virtual machine. That's why I like containers. But it's the
that's a good one.
For me, it's debugging. It's as an ops person, quick feedback. We deploy something. How quick can I get feedback? How can I debug? How can I improve it? And that's on VMs. That's slow. On app services, that can be difficult. Containers, I love them, but I mean,
sometimes I just want to see event loss and that sort of stuff.
That's sometimes you want to go into in the computer, into the VM. You do Windows key R and you type event viewer, event VWR, and then you get stuff. Or sometimes I just want to do MMC and check the certificates.
Sometimes, I mean, it's basic, but it's how we do it, I guess.
Yeah. Maybe we're just traditional.
Yeah, I think so. We're old.
And we're old. And with that, we're done with the episode, and we're looking forward to the next one. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, Wesley.
Thank you for listening. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.